Well, welcome, Ms. Horwath, to the Toronto Star. We're here with Andrea Horwath, leader of the Ontario NDP, as part of a series of meetings that we're having with Ontario party leaders leading up to the election on June the 7th. And aside from the editorial board members here, we have a number of our columnists, political writers, political editors, the chair of our board, and others from the Star. So what I'd like to do over the next hour is to ask you some questions, hear from you first, ask you some questions, and also, very importantly, ask you some questions that our readers have sent in. And so I'll be putting to you some of those questions, and then some of my colleagues will be asking as well over the next hour. So welcome, and please let us know what's on your mind.
Okay, thanks very much, Andrew. And I really thought that instead of a big introductory session from myself, you know that my platform's out, it's pretty obvious, so what's in it. You mentioned, Andrew, in the other room that you have lots of questions from readers, so I think maybe we should just get started, if that's all right with you.
That's perfect.
Excellent.
That's perfect, yeah. Well, we asked over the weekend, in the last couple of days, we let readers and people on our website know that you were coming, and we asked questions, and I must say there's been a huge contribution, really dozens, scores of questions in different areas, and I think it obviously reflects the fact that I guess you're the leader of the moment in some ways, because the polls show that you're coming up very nicely, and there's a lot of attention being focused on your party and on you particularly, maybe more so than in other campaigns, certainly more so than in other campaigns at this point. And so what we found was that the largest group of questions that we got from Toronto Star readers were about I would say a bucket of issues involving your plan and credibility and trust. I think partly because people are taking the party obviously a lot more seriously, perhaps than they did in the past. You weren't, and they're digging deeper. They're paying more attention. So I'd like to start off by we got in a question. I think that a lot of readers were asking about how everything's going to add up in your platform. And one reader put it pretty bluntly in an email, and here's the question. How can we trust your government to turn around our failing math scores when you make a $1.4 billion math mistake on your platform? So could you please explain that to us and that reader?
Sure, and I first want to say that when we discovered through someone else actually discovering the error that there was in fact an error, we immediately fixed it. Basically, we went back to our numbers and we fixed it, and it's something that has happened. We regret it, absolutely, but what we didn't do is pretend that it didn't happen, and what we didn't do is try to spin our way out of it, and what we didn't do is argue with something that was obvious. And I think people have seen a lot of that. They see a government that for a long time has been more quick to argue about the challenges that people have found with their numbers, argue with the Auditor General, hire outside auditors to refute the independent officers of the legislature, whether that be the auditor or the financial accountability officer. And I think the important thing is, when you make a mistake, fess up to it and fix it. Now, I know that people are worried about the deficit, and this, of course, impacts our plan by increasing our deficit. What we will continue to do, though, is make sure we address hallway medicine, affordable childcare for families, the things that people have told us that they want some attention to. And that's going to mean we are going to be in a deficit position. This makes it a little bit higher than what we had initially anticipated. But our plan still has a deficit that increases the first 3 years and then begins to trend down towards balance. And we think that's a responsible plan.
It sort of leads into the issue of, people, now they're looking at the NDP, my goodness, certainly be the official opposition, and the way things are going, there's even speculation that it might go all the way. So there are people, they have this folk memory, if you like, of the NDP and the Ray government. So another reader asks, for perhaps the second time in recent history, the NDP has a legitimate opportunity to form our next government in Ontario. What learnings have you taken from the government of Bob Rae, which might assure the NDP of more success this time?
Well, I mean, I think the most important piece is that this isn't 1990. It's a completely different environment, and this is a completely different election. And I'm certainly not Bob Rae, and people can, read about what they like in terms of that comment. But that's the reality, and we've come now from 15 years of a Liberal government, where people are feeling pretty disappointed. Where families, in fact, after 25 years of Liberal and Conservative governments, folks are feeling like there's not much hope for the future. Families are squeezed, things are tight, and although our economy for much of that time, not all of it, I mean, we know that we had a recession where things were difficult, but prior to that recession and subsequent to that recession, the economy's done fairly well. I mean, GDP has grown, maybe not at the rates that we had once seen in this province, but everyday families have not seen the benefit of that. I mean, we have the Board of Trade now ringing the alarm bells about the fact that young people are getting ready to leave this city in droves because they can't afford a roof over their head, never mind childcare or access to a school nearby that's not crumbling. So these are the challenges that families face, and what I see and what our platform is all about is about fixing the family budget, if you will, making sure that we fix what's broken, and say to families it doesn't have to be this way. We can have hope for the future, that young people will have opportunity in our economy.
Yeah. And finally, on this theme, I mean, this is a pretty broad question, but there is a lot of cynicism about political leadership, not only in Ontario, but we can see it all around, right? And so another reader asks simply, at a time when politicians are disliked and not trusted by the voters because of their empty promises and outright lies, why should I vote for you? I've never voted NDP. I don't believe or trust Doug Ford, and I've lost faith with Kathleen Wynne. So the question really is from this reader, what makes you personally any different or more believable or more trustworthy?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I can list off a resume of milestones in my life that respond to that question. But what I can say is this: I've listened as a leader to people in our province for years now, sitting at their kitchen tables, going to their workplaces and talking on the shop floor, in the grocery stores. I mean, pretty much everywhere I go, I engage people. I've never believed as an individual that I have all the answers, nor do I believe that you can come up with solutions without actually engaging people. And so, when I look at this platform, and the reason why I'm so excited about it is because it really does come from what I've heard from people over the last decade or so as leader of the party. And so it's for me an exciting time to say to folks, you don't have to be cynical, and you don't have to just vote out of anger. You can actually vote for something instead of just against something.
Open the floor.
Ms. Horwath, one of the comments that's often made about NDP is you're too beholden to unions. And I just wanted to take an example and follow it through to find, if you became premier, whether you would ever use the power of the legislature to end a strike. And I wanted to use the example of the York University strike, the most recent. Here you had a long strike, an independent arbitrator who came to the conclusion the two sides were irreconcilably conflicted, recommended some kind of arbitration. You had thousands of students whose school year was in jeopardy, and yet the NDP voted against the motion to send that particular strike. Mm-hmm. Could you explain your position to that, and maybe then go into the broader issue of, are there times when you as premier would use the legislature to end a controversial strike?
Well, I thank you for the question, and I don't think it's a secret to anybody that that the NDP is a Labour Party. I mean, that's our roots. Question. It was founded as a political party by the Labour movement and by the CCF, the Canadian Commonwealth Federation, was the precursor to the NDP. So the Labour and the social justice side, if you will, were the two kind of founding interests in our party. And so for us, it is very much against our values to legislate, in other words, to interfere in that way in the outcomes of the bargaining process. Having said that, I think that it's clear that in Ontario, the government's made decisions over the years that have tightened up the resources in our post-secondary institutions, and as a result, we see tuition rates going up. We see more and more part-time and precarious work for the workers in those institutions, and sadly, we're actually taking an opposite trend of many other provinces. I mean, we have a very rapidly changing economy, and at a time when that's the case, you would think that we would be investing more in our post-secondary institutions to try to create environments where we can have more people to take advantage of those learning opportunities to be able to respond to a changing environment. That's what's happening in other provinces. While we are squeezing universities and colleges, well, we've capped any increases in their funding from the province to the point now where we're not even considering our post-secondary institutions as public institutions anymore. They are publicly supported institutions now because less than 50% of their revenue comes from government. Other provinces have done the opposite. They're actually boosting their investment in post-secondary institutions. And I believe if we had been better funding these institutions, we wouldn't have the labor strife that we have, because those folks that are on the picket lines are fighting. Yes, they're fighting for good jobs. They're fighting for fewer part-time positions, more stability, fewer contract positions, greater certainty around when courses get canceled, for example, and all of a sudden they're left without any income. But all of that also, I believe, will help us to provide a better post-secondary environment for learning. If you have an instructor or even a teaching assistant at university that's rushing off to teach a course or support a prof at a different institution, they don't have time to stick around and perhaps answer questions or provide supports to the students in the group that they've just spent an hour or 90 minutes with. So for many reasons, I think these labor disputes don't necessarily have to be happening in our post-secondary system, and we need to look at it from the other perspective. But I can tell you that it's not something that New Democrats favor, legislating back to work.
So let's deal with this York situation, because a very long strike and an independent arbitrator said it needed to be ended in some way. Can you imagine any circumstance in which you would use legislation to end that strike?
I don't believe that that's something that New Democrats favor, and I know that it's not. What I would prefer to do is to sit down with the administrators of the university, the board of governors, the president of the university, and talk about is there something that government can do to help settle the strike, to help make sure that the strike is ended. And again, I don't believe that that's something that should happen at the end of the line. We shouldn't be in a position where we are allowing the deterioration of the quality of work in post-secondary institutions to the point where we've seen the kind of labor disruption that we've seen, not just at York, and actually at York a number of times over the last number of years, but also through the college system.
Just one final comment. Do I take from that you could not imagine a situation in which you would use legislation to end
Yeah,
strike?
it's not. I would say yes. I can't imagine that there would be. It's a pretty heavy hammer to actually. It's basically withdrawing or removing people's constitutional rights in regards to the free collective bargaining process, and that's something that I don't favor.
So we're here with Andrea Horwath, leader of the Ontario New Democrats at the Toronto Star, where she's meeting with the editorial board and other editors. And anybody else want to jump in?
Can I just quickly follow up and then another question? You said you would talk to the Board of Governors and the leadership of the university. You didn't mention that you would talk to the union. I assume you would call them in as well.
Well, I mean, again, I don't believe that we should be in the situation that we are, where we have so much precarious work in post-secondary institutions. I mean, let's face it. If we as a party, certainly, overall, I think people in Ontario are worried about the quality of work and how it has eroded and how it doesn't support families anymore, then certainly our obligation as government that funds post-secondary education should be to acknowledge that in order to ensure that there's good work in post-secondary institutions, good work throughout the public sector, frankly, then we need to fund it. We need to make sure that the funding is available to provide good work in those locations.
So you wouldn't call in the union?
Well, if it's a matter of making sure that we don't end up in a strike, we need to do that work in advance. If we're in a strike situation, then there's an opportunity to have a conversation with both sides. Certainly, I mean, you'd have a conversation with both sides. But my point is that I would, if I were the Premier of the province, I would be making sure that I'm funding post-secondary education in a way that allows for, and we've talked about this before as well, allows for quality work experience for the folks that work in those places, not just because, you know, philosophically or because it's my value system that people should be able to earn you know, a living wage, or should be able to earn enough money to put a roof over their head in a secure, you know, work situation, but because it also impacts the quality of education that that students receive and their access to their support systems.
Okay, I'm lucky today because I'm between Laurie Monson-Bratton, who is our child care expert, and Rob Ferguson, who is our hydro expert. So I'm just going to kick it off and ask you, Rob has written about the Hydro 1 buyback that you proposed. Can you just walk us through that? In particular, as I understand it, you're going to use the dividends to buy back a $7 billion corporation, plus or minus. Those dividends are about $250 million a year. They're already allocated to spending, so how do you spend those dividends twice? How do you, I think you've said that you would actually deduct those dividends. So if you're taking those dividends out of spending now, aren't you really bringing in extra money to have to find extra money if those dividends are already spoken for?
So first and foremost, the biggest threat to our ability to utilize dividends from Hydro One came when the Liberals sold it off to private interests. I mean, that was the big hit that we took in terms of access to those dividends. And you'll see in our fiscal plan that in fact we do cover off the loss of those dividends, because we're going to be allocating those to another purpose, which was to buy back the shares. And so, I mean, that's exactly the plan. And the, you know, and nobody thinks that this is going to be easy. Nobody has said it's going to be a quick thing. It's not going to be a quick initiative, a quick effort. But I am not prepared to say that the Liberals and Conservatives have made of our electricity system is okay, and that we're just going to follow along and continue in the same vein. We are fundamentally opposite of the Liberals and Conservatives, who want more privatization in our electricity system. We don't agree that that's the right path. It has led to significantly increased prices in our electricity system. Families can't pay the bills anymore. Businesses are telling us it's one of the biggest factors that they have to face in terms of their competitiveness. And so we're not okay with the status quo. And so it's not going to be easy. And yes, we are going to do exactly that. Utilize the dividends to buy back the shares. And the other thing is important to, I think, acknowledge that this is not the first time that a company has, for example, you know, gone out to the markets and then decided they were going to go back to private ownership. I mean, everything from Dell Computers to Heinz, for example, have done that over the years. So we know that that's something that is doable. But more importantly, we know that the track we're on right now is going to increase electricity bills by about 70% within the next couple of years. And we're not okay with that. And I don't think Ontario families are okay with that, nor are Ontario businesses okay with that.
Well, staying on that theme, going back to some of our readers' questions, sure. You know, one of the big issues was hydro and bills, but also balancing against the environment, right? Because it's one thing to say, you know, you want cheap hydro, you want cheap energy, cheap gas, and so forth, but that's fine. But you've also got to have a policy, I think, for any progressive party that also addresses the environment, climate change, and so forth. And I think, for example, time of use pricing. One reader writes in and says, I think a very intelligent question, pointing out the advantages of this, that's saying that, you know, by shifting demand off peak, it makes less need for building more capacity. You can save money if you use high energy things like dryers and whatnot,
Sure.
off-peak, all that kind of thing, all
Sure.
the advantages.
Sure.
And so I guess my question to you is, when I look at the NDP platform, for a progressive party, it seems pretty light on the environment. And it seems to me that you're going very much, I'll use the word pandering, towards people who just want low energy prices at all costs, and not really, and if it does pinch a bit, if it does pinch, then it seems that you're backing off. And I wonder, why are you not putting more emphasis on the long-term effects and the need to shift towards a fundamentally different approach to pricing energy?
Well, I mean, not at all. I mean, I quite the opposite. I believe that we should be helping people to reduce their consumption. I believe we should be reducing our carbon footprint and dealing with greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, we are very supportive of the cap and trade plan that exists in our province. We were pushing the government of the day to get rid of the coal-fired plants, something that we were quite vigorous about. The time of use pricing, though, didn't meet those goals. It didn't meet the goal of conservation, and it didn't meet the goal of people reducing their consumption or saving any money. And so all of the things that it was supposed to do weren't achieved. What we do intend on doing is making sure that we are helping people to buy those energy saving dryers and appliances, fridges, those kinds of things, that we have a robust program to help people, for example, to install solar hot water heaters or solar panels on their roofs. I mean, these are things that we believe are extremely important, but we also know that families don't have the money. People don't have the money under the mattress or anywhere else, frankly, to undertake these initiatives. So we take the carrot approach, and we help people to do the right thing by providing them opportunity to purchase these kinds of appliances and other kind of implements that help them to reduce their energy consumption. The other thing is, with the cap and trade plan that we have in place, we were disappointed that the Liberals didn't take our advice on the cap and trade plan by setting aside 25% of the revenues from cap and trade to make sure that low-income families, communities that are more significantly impacted by harsher weather, so for example, Northern Ontario, trade-exposed industries, we had asked that 25% of the revenues get utilized to help those folks, weather the storm, if you will, or help those folks to do their part when it comes to climate change initiatives. And so, quite the opposite. We think that we can do better in terms of encouraging people to reduce their carbon footprint. The difference is, without owning our own electricity system, without owning our own Hydro One, we've actually lost a tool. We've actually lost a tool to help us with our environmental goals and with our climate change goals. I mean, this is one of the biggest failures of that decision, is that when we had a tool that we could have utilized to help us with some of these projects, and unfortunately we now don't, because now that utility operates in the best interests of the shareholders and not of government policy, and not of of businesses, and not of families.
Wouldn't you accept, though, that there is going to be inevitably a price that individuals, all of us, are going to have to pay in order to mitigate climate change and so forth? We can't simply, the era of cheap energy is obviously over by, we can see it here, but isn't that a good thing, in the sense that we should value energy more and be incented to use it? And if every time somebody says, my bill's going up and so forth, I mean, and politicians rush to make it all good, isn't that just undermining the long-term plan? Isn't there a price that people have to pay individually?
So there's no doubt that there's a price. The difference is that some of us are more able to pay the price than others, and that's the fairness piece that is not built in to the Liberals' cap and trade plan. And so certainly we do need to make sure that people are thoughtful about the impact that they have on the environment, and whether that's heating their home, whether that's putting gas in their car if they have no other alternatives, such as transit, or whether that's any other kind of initiative that people ignore or don't undertake because it's not something they feel like doing. Like, for example, looking to a hot water heater that's solar rather than traditional. The bottom line is we're not all equal, and so when it's lower income families who are already having a hard time making ends meet, who can't afford to put a roof over their head, who are really truly making decisions about heating and eating, fixed income seniors, people on social assistance and disability support programs. I mean, it's not that everyone has the same capacity, and so what we're saying is we need to make sure that we're taking care of people's ability to build a decent life here. And when we put together initiatives around climate change, there's no doubt that those folks who are having the hardest time in terms of doing their part, if you will, they're going to need some help, and we're prepared to make sure that they get that help.
Something like, I think you said last week that you wouldn't allow the gas companies to raise gas prices right before long weekends. I mean, that's got nothing to do with helping vulnerable seniors. I mean, I get
just gouging. And so this is a fairness
I get the emotion.
issue,
I get
right?
the emotional impact of that. Everybody wants to go and pump up before the long weekend and drive off. I mean, emotionally,
and they are. They are going to.
Yeah, they are going to,
and so that's why it's exploitative.
But that's got nothing to do with helping.
But that's not nothing to do with the climate change issue, though. I mean, I'm sorry, but really, the gouging at the pumps before a long weekend, people are going to go to the pumps before a long weekend because they're heading out to the cottage, and so allowing these interests in the gas sector to just gouge people because they can. It's not going to make a difference in terms of people going to. They're not going to decide not to go to the cottage, but so what we're saying is we'll just let these these companies, these corporations, just suck up a bunch of more profits because they can. That piece is a fairness issue. That piece straight up is a fairness issue. People deserve better than having their pocket picked just because they're coming into a long weekend.
I'll just make it, when you talk like that, I could see Doug Ford saying that, like anti-elitist and so forth, kind of a populist move. And maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, but
but
nonetheless,
that's not where I come to it from. I don't come to it from that. I come to it from these corporations that already make huge profits, and fine, that's the private market. But to just gouge people because they can, and it's not going to, and so the low income families that we were talking about before, those low-income families aren't going to the cottage for the long weekend. So it's got, they're not going to the cottage. But this is seen, from my perspective, as just it's an opportunistic gouging, and I think that it's something that people should not have to put up with just because there's a long weekend. It's and again, I don't see this as one of the big climate change issues that we face, and we have many more of them. Overall, what we need to do is build more transit, get more people out of their cars, make sure that we're providing options to folks to find the ways to reduce their carbon footprint. And then the other piece is the transparency. I mean, we have a cap and trade plan that is not very transparent, and even those people who are, which is all of us, paying in some ways with increased gas charges, for example, we don't see those on our bills, so we don't even know what we are contributing. And so there's the transparency piece as well, not only in terms of what people are paying right now, but also in terms of the revenues that are coming in and how they're being invested. And so when we looked at the Liberals' cap and trade plan, which we overall support, we had some ideas for them. One was about the fairness, which we've talked about. One was about the transparency, and the third flows from the transparency, and that's about the effectiveness. And so how do we measure the effectiveness, and how do we do that in a public way if there's very little transparency in the system?
So we're here with Andrea Horwath, leader of Ontario New Democrats, the Toronto Star editorial board. Mr. Ferguson.
I've got one. I would like to pick up on John's question from earlier about is there a situation where you would consider back to work legislation, and that makes me think of when we've had TTC strikes and bring the city to a halt. So are you saying that you would absolutely not do that? And what would you tell, if you were Premier, what would you tell the people of Toronto if we're in the second week or the third week of a TTC
Well, that won't
strike.
happen though, Rob, because we already passed legislation to take the right to strike away from the TTC workers after that last strike, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
I shouldn't say we. I should say the Liberals.
Yeah, we didn't support that, so we want to do it.
Well, again, it's moot at this point for the City of Toronto. That's that right to strike does not exist for the TCC workers.
Would you take that back though?
No.
No? So you leave that in place?
Yeah.
What would you do in the situation
Of a very lengthy, say, an elementary school strike.
Well, again, I mean, so here's something that's very very important. Families are the ones, and children are the ones that end up paying the price when government does not fund our schools appropriately. And we saw what happened with Bill 115, and when the Liberals decided for political reasons to pick a fight with teachers. I think that parents and educators and hopefully government should be on the same page when it comes to what the goals are of our education system. And I think that we have a great platform that addresses some of the pieces that are broken in our education system. I mean, we're still operating largely under the Mike Harris funding formula. We fund special education, education assistance for kids that need extra help based on averages instead of based on the actual children in the classroom that need supports. That's no way to make sure that every child has the opportunity to reach their full potential. So you'll see in our platform investments in EAs. You'll see in our platform investments in mental health workers. You'll see in our platform commitments to a new system for evaluating the progress of our children, because this is what families have told us that they want, and this is what has been frustrating for people who work in the education system. And I think both families and educators have the same goal, which is to have an education system that allows each and every child to explore their gifts and reach their full potential.
Well, I think behind that, I'm going to say, is there not something called the public interest, which is distinct from the interest of a given group of workers at a given moment? I mean, I think that's what we're trying to get at here, is as Premier, if you became Premier, isn't it your job to assess the public interest as opposed to, the group of workers who happen to be on strike at a given moment? I mean, you seem to be, I get that we can talk about education, make education better, or we can make the situation of teaching assistants at York University better and so forth, right? Mm-hmm. Those are all good. But at a certain point, doesn't a Premier have to look at the public interest and not the particular interests of one smaller group of the public?
But it is in the public interest to invest in our education system, whether it be post-secondary or elementary or secondary. I mean, and it is in the public interest to make sure that we have an education system that meets the needs of young people and gets them ready to contribute to the economy.
At a given moment, isn't it in the public interest sometimes to stop a dispute and then go to work on those issues? Of course, you have to go to work on those issues. I think that's what we're trying to get at.
Yeah, but let's remember what's happened when the government has come forward with legislation that is the heavy hammer that creates greater disruption. I mean, we end up being sued. The unions, if you want to describe them as such, the representatives of those education workers, end up taking the government, the people of Ontario, to the courts. And we end up not only having then lost time in terms of the classroom, but the public interest is not served when we then have to shell out millions and millions and millions and millions of more dollars because the government decided to stomp on the constitutional rights of those people. And so there's no such thing as it's only this one moment in time. All of these things have repercussions and they have implications. And so, so yes, the job of the Premier is to weigh all of these things. The job of a government is to weigh all of these things, and not necessarily just to make a decision because it's in your political best interest, which is what's made people very disappointed in the way that Kathleen Wynne has behaved in the last number of years. Because there has been a sense that a lot of her decisions were based on what is better for her politically and what will give her party a bump in the polls.
Ms. Horwath, you make a good point that the Liberals lost that court battle because the judges viewed that they had jumped the gun. But in the York strike, that's been going on for more than 2 months, and this time the government waited a long time, brought in an outside expert who decided that this strike might never end because the sides just aren't talking and are too far apart. So how do these two situations compare?
Well, again, and you're correct to identify that each individual situation is separate and unique and has its own history, if you will, and its own resolution. And look, I mean, I think the most important piece is that we should try to do everything we can to avoid being in the situation where these strikes are inevitable because of the withdrawal of public support for these institutions, but also that as these sides are coming to a head in terms of a lack of resolution, then the government needs to have a role in in providing some options to get to a resolve.
So I want to stick with the education sector. Very intrigued in your platform as well that you want to get rid of standardized testing in the schools. I thought there was a great debate when this was brought in, and I know there were arguments on both sides. I thought we got to the point where both parents and the system and everyone felt that this was a good way how we found out how we're teaching certain subjects, how certain schools are doing, etc. I just want to understand why you're now opposed to standardized testing in our schools.
Sure, and it's certainly just not just me. In fact, it was Obama a couple years back who raised the issue in the public debate in the States about the extent to which we've now become a system that teaches to the test instead of actually helping our children learn to love learning. And I think that's where this has led us, unfortunately. Instead of being focused on giving children the opportunity, as I said earlier, to explore their own talents and exploit their own gifts and support them in that opportunity, we are now rigidly teaching to the test, and we see parents who pull their kids out because of the levels of stress and anxiety that kids face. I mean, I've heard many stories from parents who are just beside themselves over the stress levels that their children experience in preparation for the big test. We hear concerns from educators that they are, instead of doing the things that they feel that they should be doing to help children develop a love for learning, instead they focus on the test scores, and then the focus becomes which the various schools within the board and the comparison of the results. That's not what people want. What people want is to be able to know that their kids are getting a kind of education that helps them develop a pathway to success, whatever that success looks like for that individual child. And so what I would I'm not saying that we would not have any kind of measurement whatsoever. That would be completely irresponsible. But certainly work with current experts and thought leaders in the field right now, as well as educators and experts, if we want to call them that, and come up with a system of testing that allows for the feedback for parents, enables the educators to do their job, but most importantly, provides children and young people with a foundation of learning that's more about a test score, that's less about a test score rather, and more about their ability to succeed.
So you're for testing, but not
sure. Yeah, so whether it's some whether it's some kind of random sampling testing or another model, but the EQAO testing has become very, very rigid and very very narrow, and it's created I believe not just myself, others as well. There's this sense that the teaching to the test has become you know, the goal, teaching to the test, so that we can get the scores on the you know, the headlines of the papers.
So it's not that you give up testing, because I mean, it was fascinating. For example, we discovered that Quebec taught science and math better than anyone else, and there were lessons to be learned. We learned that through the testing. So you'd still be in favor of doing things to try and find out.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we definitely need to be testing. I mean, the issue becomes, is it some sort of random sampling testing, for example? Is it some combination of random sampling and other measurements? You know, not only do parents deserve to know, you know, how their child is progressing and you know, where they may need some help, but we need to know how well our schools are doing in educating our children and preparing them for the world.
I think we have some questions coming in during the meeting. What do we got?
We have one of our audiences sent in a question saying that your platform costing is dependent on economic growth staying as it is or getting better. How can you ensure that will happen when you are promising things like tax increases on corporations?
Sure. No, it's a really great question, and it kind of speaks to what I was talking about at the very beginning around what I hear from businesses in our province. First and foremost, I think it's pretty clear that our economy has not benefited everyday families in the way it could have. And so we have had growth, and that's great, but more and more we see families struggling, not able to pay the bills, not able to afford childcare, not able to afford a roof over their heads, feeling like they're not getting ahead. And so we think that the economy should be about people. And we think that as people are able to have a better life, it will improve our economic situation in this province. One of the things I hear from businesses, though, when they come and talk to me, when the chambers come to talk to me, their first ask, in fact, I don't think they've ever come up and asked for corporate tax cuts. That's not what they tell me. What they tell me is they need lower electricity costs. What they tell me is they need a skilled workforce that they can draw from to be successful. What they tell me is that they need a good transportation system so that we don't have goods that are stuck on highways not able to reach their destination. I think I can't remember what the Board of Trade estimated in terms of the economic loss, but it's in the billions of goods that are stuck on the highways. And so these are the things that businesses tell me about. But the other thing they tell me is that, so we're going to disagree on some things. I mean, so the corporate tax rate might be one of the things we disagree on. But what they've said to me is, we don't want shocks and surprises. We can pretty much handle anything that any government throws at us, but we can't handle shocks and surprises. We can't turn our businesses around on a dime. So if you're going to do something, let us know. At least give us the respect and have that relationship with us, that if you're going to make a change, you give us some advance notice, give us some warning. And so that's why you'll see our fiscal plan. In year one, we don't change the corporate tax rate. The Liberals brought the corporate tax rate down from 14% when they took office. So it was 14% when the Conservatives were in office. The Liberals brought it down to 11.5. In year 2 and year 3, we're going to tick that corporate tax rate up. Not in year 1, though, because I've made the commitment to the business community that I'm not going to surprise them with a sudden corporate tax increase. But they know very well that year 2 it'll go up by 1 point, and year 3 another 0.5 point, and at that point we'll be at 13, which is still 1% lower, 1 point lower than when the Liberals started reducing the corporate taxes. And what did we get from the corporate tax reductions? We didn't get the productivity investment that we were going to be apparently going to be getting. We have seen wages remain flat in our province. In fact, families in Ontario have seen the least wage growth of all of the other provinces. We've done the worst in our province when it comes to wage growth. And so the economy might have worked for the most profitable corporations. The richest businesses might have done well by the economy, everyday families certainly haven't. And that's why we're saying, we're asking those, richest corporations and wealthiest Ontarians to help us, make life better for everybody else. Make sure that people can afford childcare. The stories I hear from young families who say they want to have a second child here in Toronto, but they've decided they can't afford to have a second child because they can't afford the childcare. We see that there are companies that look at Toronto, for example, or Ontario as a place to invest, like the Amazon. Were they looking at the corporate tax rate? They were looking at lifestyle. They were looking at talent pool. Those are the things that they were looking at.
So we're here live with Andrea Horwath, the leader of Ontario New Democrats, meeting with editors and writers of the Toronto Star. Heather, I think you have a question.
Yes, I'm thinking about precarious work as a massive global trend that is unstoppable. Yet I want to ask you, is there one specific thing you could do to fight it here in Ontario? And that's why we keep mentioning the York strike, because adjuncts at universities, they are just the top for suffering great precarious work. Is there one specific thing you could do? Maybe it can't be stopped. Maybe precarious work will be with us for the next generation.
Well, and you know what, Heather, you make a good point, and so things like the temp agencies, for example, as a an organization or a business that that encourages more precarious work rather than less. I mean, so there are pieces like that we can look at, but that's one of the reasons why we are so adamant about our universal prescription drug plan and our dental plan, because we know what's happening in the economy. I mean, I don't need to talk to you folks. You see it in your own industry as well as everywhere else, right? I mean, it's a problem, and so if we know that more and more people are working a couple of part-time jobs to make ends meet, or they're working contract to contract or casual labor, or a lot of young people are choosing entrepreneurship, which is not a bad thing, right? They're choosing to build their own businesses because they can't find a job anywhere. That's a positive piece, I think, the entrepreneurship piece, but those folks are not going to be able to get any dental work done because it's really expensive. I mean, in Ontario, every 3 minutes, someone is going to an emergency ward or a doctor's office to try to get pain in their mouth dealt with. Why is that? Well, it's because nobody has to pull out a credit card or their phone to pay for a bill at an emergency ward or in a doctor's office. But what we do know is that more and more people are working in jobs or cobbling together a number of jobs or pieces of work that don't provide them with dental benefits, for example. And so, when we look at the changing nature of our economy, we can do things like the temp agencies and discouraging that kind of exploitative practice, the worst parts of it. But we also have to do things from the public policy perspective to help people to be able to have a decent life. I mean, I met this one young man who, when he was in his late teens, went to work he was from a lower income family, went to work on a construction site, fell and broke his front tooth. And for years, he wasn't able to get that front tooth fixed. And he talked about how that affected his prospects in life, how it affected his social interactions, let alone, trying to do a job interview with an employer and have confidence and feel that he was able to sell himself to that employer. He was pushing 30, he finally saved up enough money to get the tooth fixed, but he said it impacted his life in a very negative way. I had one last one. A gentleman in Oshawa was telling me that he's a real estate agent, right? So he sells houses, and so when he gets a sale, the household does well. They put a little bit away. They try to budget their money, but they could never find enough money to take the whole family to get their teeth looked at, to get a dental exam. So finally, they made it a priority. They saved up. They went to the dentist, 3 kids. The one child had a couple of cavities, but he couldn't afford to say to the dentist, yeah, fill the cavities. Instead, he had to put the kids back in the car, go back home, knowing that his child had cavities that were just going to get worse until he could save up enough money to go back or get make another sale to go back to the dentist to get those cavities filled.
Well,
No parent should have to do that.
Absolutely right. I mean, no question we should all have dental care. But sometimes I wonder, and this is possibly unfair, that by doing these good things for workers, you're in a way propping up the precarious gig economy. Because you're doing things that corporations should be doing.
Well, and on the dental plan, the dental plan is such that businesses that currently don't have a dental plan in place will be required to. So, and we are working around trying to figure out exactly that piece, the gig economy piece. But people who are working will be able to get benefits from their employer, and that means that those small businesses, for example, that at this point in time have a hard time buying into a benefits plan because they're small and because they have a small workforce, it becomes very expensive, and it also becomes unwieldy administratively when you don't have an HR department to manage your benefit plans and all of those things. And so we will be putting together, it's in our platform, kind of a body called Ontario Benefits, and those smaller businesses will be required to purchase dental benefits for their employees, and it'll be the same as everybody else who currently has benefits. In other words, it's a premium from both employer and employee that'll be a payroll deduction that goes to Ontario Benefits, and then Ontario Benefits provides the dental benefits, and so employers will be required to provide the employee benefits.
Does that work even if
dental.
you work through a temp agency?
Well,
Anything that
yeah,
you do?
it will be through temp agencies as well. We are going to the piece, and I'm straight up about it. The piece that we're working the hardest on now is the gig economy piece. So those people in the entertainment field, for example, or as you describe it as the gig economy. I mean, that's the hardest piece, and we're working on that. But the other part of our plan is that if you're a senior citizen, here's another interesting piece. Right now, about 1/3 of workers are not covered with any benefit plan. Opposite retirees, 2/3 of people retiring, right? They had benefit plans while they were working, and the minute they retire, they lose their benefits. So those 2/3 of seniors will be able to get dental benefits with their OHIP card, and low-income families on social assistance. Right now, they're able to get mostly emergency work done, but we will be ensuring that they can get dental benefits with their OHIP card as well, or dental care.
We're starting to count down towards the end, so we can get a few more in.
Sure.
Lauren, you want to jump in?
A quick question about childcare.
Sure.
I know last week there was some questions around how viable your plan is. Gord Cleveland, the undisputed expert in this area, says your plan to start with infants and toddlers is unrealistic. If you were elected, would you be willing to modify your plan a bit, maybe provide more subsidies for that age group, and go with free childcare or lower cost childcare for preschool children, 2.5 to kindergarten, where there are already 100,000 spaces, parents already paying an arm and a leg there, where you can give them immediate relief, whereas with the infants and toddlers, there's far fewer licensed spaces that are there, and he says it's just going to mean huge lineup, waiting list.
Sure. Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, first and foremost, where families are already receiving subsidies, we're going to make sure that that's going to continue. Our first year is going to be all about ECEs and new spaces. So that's going to be an important piece. But look, when I talk to moms, and I just happened to be in a restaurant doing an interview on the, we were on the Danforth when we did that, saw that Moms Club? We were on the Danforth, and there happened to be a mums group with all their little infants, which was so lovely. There was about a dozen of them. Talk about joy in the room. I talked to them about what their needs are. And when one of the parents in a family has to take time off work and see the reduction of the wages to the family or the income to the family, the thing that moms tell me is the most important for them is to get back to work. And so our plan is actually one to help those moms get back to work sooner so that the family income can go up. And so under 40,000, free childcare, and starting with infants and toddlers, not only because it's the most expensive care, and so it's hardest on the budget, but it's also the most important in terms of two pieces. One, getting the family income back up and to a level where they're accustomed to it being, but the other is that it's very clear that that's when the greatest activity in terms of brain development happens for children. It's between the 6-month and 18-month period that the brain expands the most, and that is why that's where our focus is.
14,000 licensed spaces for infants in this.
Well, and that's why the first year, that's our focus. Our first year, that's our focus.
But you're not going to be able to build another 60,000 spaces in 1 year.
Our plan is to build over 200,000 spaces in the first couple of years. Well, but we've seen a government that has been. We see a government that has not been focused on solving this problem for families. After 15 years of Liberals, we have people here paying $2,000 or more for childcare, and that's something that we're going to try to fix.
I know that this isn't 1990. It's quite a ways past that. The only experience Ontarians have had with an NDP government was the Ray government. And it made promises that it didn't keep, particularly on auto insurance. It laid off nurses without, and that was not in its platform. It did a number of things that didn't work out for it and didn't work out for the province. I guess the question is, how can Ontarians be sure that you will do what you want to do, what you claim to be able to do, that you promise to do? How can every political party breaks its promises, it seems. How can we be sure that you won't?
Well, and I think this again goes back to the initial discussion we were having about people becoming cynical about politics and cynical about politicians, and what that leads to, of course, is people don't even bother to vote anymore. And I believe that we can do better than that. I believe that we can not only talk to people about what their needs are, which we have been doing, but then put in place a plan that actually addresses the struggles that families have, and that's what our plan does. And on top of all of that, we found the path towards trying to make Ontario more equitable, if you will, a more equitable place where those who make the most or earn the most or have the most benefit from our economy are asked to contribute a little bit more to help us ensure that people have hope for the future. Because I hear from folks, not only are they concerned about themselves, about their young adult children not having opportunities and having a lot of debt from school, about hallway medicine, all the things we've talked about, hydro bills, all of it. But they're also now very worried about the next generation. And what are we leaving for the next generation? And I'm confident that we've got a plan that not only addresses, the here and now, but starts to show folks that it doesn't have to be the way it's been for the last 20, 25 years. That we can have the the kind of government that's really focused on people.
But as my colleagues have pointed out, in key areas, a lot of your remedies don't sound realistic. Gord Cleveland makes a point about childcare, and he's basically on your side. On buying back Hydro 1, it'll take how many generations to buy back Hydro 1? I think that's the point my colleague Martin made. So what's to stop you from, there is a chance you're going to win, actually. So
that's a big statement.
So what people are afraid of, I think, is that if you win, you'll get in power and say, whoops, things are a lot worse than we thought. Can't do that. Cupboard's bare.
Well,
childcare won't necessarily work out the way we thought it would. Hydro won't necessarily work out the way we thought it would. It's got to be a little more complicated.
Well, on the contrary, on the hydro plan, we've had that plan up and on the internet for 2.5 years for people to look at. And as I said, we know it's not going to be easy, but look, we've had such disappointment over these last number of years. We're determined to make a difference for people. That's the entire purpose of our platform, and the pieces that we are committing to, because it will make life easier for families. And whether that's more access to and more affordable childcare, whether that's saying that we don't accept the status quo with our hydro system. We actually want to fix the hydro system so that it works for families and businesses, not only today, but for the next generations. And when I talk to people about particularly hydro, and they say those things to me, Tom, they say, you know, how's this going to happen and how long is it going to take? And I say to them, it depends on the share price. Because depending on the share price, that'll determine how much of the dividends get eaten up. And that will also determine the length of time it'll take us to buy back hydro. And you know what people tell me? They say, okay, it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile doing that. And so, you know, the plans that we have are absolutely achievable plans, and they're plans that come from the fact that people are so disappointed with having, you know, spent the last couple of decades seeing their quality of life, if not erode, certainly not improve. And we believe that it can be so much better than that for people.
One more question.
Just a quick one to excuse me, to follow up on Tom. One of the problems that Bob Ray had was, you know, he won unexpectedly, and then he found that he had a very thin bench for forming a cabinet. For example, he had a tourism minister who'd never been on an airplane. So you are yeah, it's true. I was there. So today and lately, you've had the other parties digging up things on some of your candidates. So, and you know, I was asking you about that on Sunday in Kingston. How confident are you that you're going to have, if should you win, that you will have a thick enough bench to actually form a good cabinet and govern the way you would like to? Because we all know the pitfalls the Ray government ran into with inexperienced people in very high positions.
Good training programs for the cabinet. Good training programs. Yeah, but you know, let me put it this way. I will focus the next couple of weeks on, you know, sharing with people the vision that we have, assuring people that we can make the changes that people want to see in the province. And if they give us their support, then that's a problem that I'll deal with at that point. I'm certainly not going to jump ahead to you know, to that point at this juncture. I think we need to give people the respect of allowing them to make their decision, and then I'll be confident to at that time, you know, fulfill whatever role they have given to me.
Thank you very much. You've been live here at the Toronto Star with Andrea Horwath, leader of Ontario Democrats. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Are the mics off?
That's what we usually ask. It was my pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.